In June 1941, the German army attacked the Soviet Union in the so-called Operation Barbarossa. Now, many people claim that this was Hitler's greatest mistake. A lot of people also call it a really dumb decision, basically saying you don't start a land war in Russia. But this thinking is pretty flawed because most people now know that the Soviet Union was a superpower, but the Soviet Union wasn't a superpower prior to World War II. Even in the late 1920s, Germany helped the Soviet Union modernizing its industry. We can't just go from our post-war viewpoint or even from the viewpoint from around 2000 and look back and say, oh, well, that's pretty obvious. Yeah, now it is pretty obvious because we know how history played out. Where we need to look is actually what did the people know in the 1930s and early 1940s? What information was available for Hitler and the German general staff? So where do we start? We start with the last war, because after all, every general fights the last war. So let's take a look at the war that didn't end all wars, World War I. Now, Germany, as in World War II, fought on the Eastern and on the Western Front. On the Western Front, there was trench warfare. It was static, it was a huge meat grinder, a lot of people died, and the front line didn't change very much throughout all the 4 years. Now on the Eastern Front it was also a meat grinder, but this meat grinder was a little bit more mobile. On the Eastern Front, the vast amount of space allowed for mobile warfare. Now the focus of the German army was mostly on the Western Front throughout the war. But nevertheless, the German army failed to achieve victory on the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, the Russian army attacked in 1914. Now East Prussia was defended by a small amount of German troops in comparison to the Western Front and also consisted of a lot of reserve troops. Nearly in every major engagement throughout the whole war on the Eastern Front, Germany won. Usually the Russians attacked the Austro-Hungarian troops and defeated them, and then the German army came to rescue. And this was going on for several years until finally the Russian army and the Russian government in the end collapsed and a peace treaty between Russia and Germany was signed. So basically the German army on the Eastern Front achieved a victory with less effort than on the Western Front. So now let's take a look at the situation in summer 1940. In 1939, Germany attacked Poland. It was mainly mobile warfare and Germany won. Then in 1940, Germany attacked the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Denmark, Norway, and fought also against the British Expansionary Force. It was a highly mobile war and Germany won in a very short amount of time. Now let's take a closer look at the numbers. Now in the invasion of Poland, Germany lost around 20,000 dead or missing, and about 50,000 in the Battle of France and the Low Countries, and around 5,000 in the battle against Norway and Denmark. Now let us compare these numbers to the losses in World War I. In total, Germany lost 2 million soldiers in World War I. On the Western Front, 1.7 million and 300,000 more men on the Eastern Front. So basically, the victory in 1940 was not just a victory, it was a tremendous victory, especially in comparison to the performance in World War I. Now if you think about it, the generation that fought World War II achieved in a few months a very small amount of losses, everything the previous generation couldn't achieve in years, and way more losses. Now at this point, it is pretty hard for anyone to not to start to believe their own bullshit. And yet there's one significant factor we didn't consider yet. The recent performance of the Soviet army on the battlefield. The Winter War in 1939, when the Soviet army attacked Finland. Now let's take a look at the forces. These numbers are not totally exact because the amount of troops varied throughout the war, and I took the number from the start of the war. And also the sources vary, of course. So in the beginning, the Finnish army fielded about 250,000 men, whereas the Russians fielded around 420,000 men. The Finnish had around 30 tanks, whereas the Russian brought around 2,500 tanks, mostly consisting of T-26 and BT-5s, but also some T-28 and the heavy tank KV-1, which was a very formidable enemy even in 1941 again for the Germans. When it comes to Air Force, the Finnish had around 100 planes, mostly fighter airplanes, whereas the Russians had about 2,500 planes. Due to the political situation, Germany prevented the delivery of arms to Finland. Basically, Finland fought isolated. It was not at all a fair fight, but the Finnish didn't care at all. They made the Russians pay for every snowflake they walked over. And the Soviet army was humiliated. In the end, the Finnish line finally collapsed and the Finnish signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, the reputation of the Soviet army was severely tarnished. So now let's conclude and go back to our timeline. If we take a look at the information that was available in summer 1940, the performance of the Russian troops in World War I was way below the performance of the German army in World War I. The performance of the German army so far in World War II was superb, and the performance of the Soviet army in the Winter War was humiliating. So basically there were no indications that the Soviet army would be a formidable enemy against the German army in 1941. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that Operation Barbarossa in itself was a flawless plan at all. It wasn't. The German army and Hitler made many mistakes, but this is a topic for another video. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and see you next time.